If I told you a happily married man sleeps in a different room than his wife every single night, what would you assume? That the marriage is dying, that something broke, that it's only a matter of time. You'd be wrong. David hasn't shared a bed with his wife in over a year, and he says it's the reason he still wants to grow old with her. There's a quiet epidemic spreading through Gen X marriages right now, and it has nothing to do with falling out of love. It's the opposite. Stay till the end. Point 6. Might change how you see your own marriage completely. David remembers the exact night it started, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. His wife had the flu, and he moved to the guest room just for a few nights, so neither of them would lose sleep. 3 nights turned into 3 weeks. 3 weeks turned into a year. Nobody decided anything. There was no conversation, no argument, no moment where either of them said, "Let's stop sleeping together." It just became normal. And that's the part that surprised David the most. How quietly a 40-year-old idea of marriage could unravel, without either of them meaning for it to. Here's what almost nobody talks about openly. Across the country, millions of Gen X couples, now in their 50s and 60s, are sleeping in separate rooms. Not out of anger, not out of distance, out of something much simpler. The body's demand for rest, after decades pretending it didn't need any. Therapists have started calling it a sleep divorce, a name that sounds clinical, almost cold. But ask the couples living it, and they'll tell you the opposite is true. The fighting stopped. The morning irritability disappeared. Somewhere between the exhaustion and the silence, something in the marriage actually got softer. David grew up believing a specific kind of proof existed for love, and it looked like 2 people, 1 bed, every night, no exceptions. His parents slept that way for 43 years. He never once saw the alternative model for him. So when he first woke up alone in that guest room, ceiling fan turning slowly above him, he didn't feel relief. He felt guilt, like he was quietly failing a test his father had passed without ever being told he was taking it. It took him years to ask the question underneath the guilt. Was it ever really about the bed? Or had he just never been given the language to separate being loved from being touching at all times in the dark? This is a story of a generation discovering, late and mostly in private, that a marriage can survive and even deepen the moment it stops confusing closeness with proximity. David is 7 years old, and it's past midnight. He's crept out of his room because he had a bad dream, and he's standing at his parents' door. He doesn't remember what scared him that night, but he remembers what he saw when he pushed the door open. 2 shapes, side by side, breathing in the same slow rhythm. And somehow, in that half-asleep, 7-year-old mind, that image became the answer to an unspoken question he didn't even know he was asking. This is what safe looks like. This is what a marriage is. Nobody sat him down and taught him that lesson. It was absorbed the way children absorb everything, not through words, but through repetition, through decades of 1 bed. Every night, no version of otherwise ever entering the frame. And David wasn't alone in that. Go back and look at what actually built that image. The shared marital bed wasn't always the standard. For centuries, separate rooms were often a marker of wealth and respect, not distance. But somewhere around the mid-20th century, an entire commercial machine got to work rewriting it. Mattress advertisements started selling togetherness instead of comfort. Hollywood closed nearly every love story on the same shot. 2 people, 1 bed, lights fading to black, until audiences stopped noticing it was a choice being sold to them at all. Gen X grew up inside that machine's final, most successful decades. Not just told a story about what marriage should look like, but shown it night after night, in the one room in the house they weren't supposed to walk into. So when David, at 54, first considered sleeping in a separate room, some part of him wasn't making a practical decision about mattresses or snoring. Some part of him was standing at that childhood door again, quietly afraid that walking away from it meant walking away from what safe was ever supposed to look like. That's the real inheritance so many people in this generation are carrying, without ever naming it. It was never a rule about beds. It was a picture planted before they could speak of what love was supposed to look like from the outside. And no one ever told them they were allowed to check whether it still felt like that from the inside. 11:47 p.m. David is doing math he never expected to do at this age. 6 hours until her alarm, and his own body clock that's been waking him at 4 a.m. unprompted for the better part of a decade. Beside him, she shifts again, fourth time in 20 minutes. Neither of them is doing anything wrong. Two nervous systems, married for 30 years, are simply running on different clocks now, and no amount of love synchronizes a hormone. This is the part almost nobody prepares you for. The body you share a bed with at 25 is a stranger to the one you're sharing it with at 55. For many women, perimenopause brings night sweats with no warning. She wakes drenched, heart hammering, and kicks the blanket off in one motion. He, still half asleep, pulls it back over himself, chilled by the draft she just made. Neither says a word. Neither needs to. This has happened enough times that it's just Tuesday. Multiply that by 3,000 nights, and something breaks down that has nothing to do with love. Sleep researchers call it sleep debt, and its cruelest symptom isn't fatigue. It's who you become to the person you love most when you're running on empty. Shorter temper, thinner patience, a version of yourself you don't recognize. Showing up at the breakfast table. David remembers the exact morning it clicked. He'd snapped, really snapped, over a coffee mug in the wrong cabinet, and mid-sentence, he heard himself and thought, this was never about the mug. I haven't slept past 4 in 11 days. That night, he moved to the guest room, not out of anger this time, as an experiment. The next morning, making coffee, something in him had gone quiet in a good way. He wanted to talk to her, not out of guilt for the night before, out of something he hadn't felt in years, actual rested patience. The body, it turns out, was never the enemy of the marriage. It had been asking for permission to rest. Quietly, for years, long before either of them thought to give it. There's a version of David that exists for exactly 20 minutes a day. 6 a.m., coffee in hand, sitting alone at the kitchen table before the house wakes up. He didn't design this ritual. He just noticed one morning that it was the only 20 minutes where nobody needed anything from him. For 30 years, he thought a good marriage meant erasing that need entirely. Two people becoming one life, so completely merged there was no his left, no hers, only ours. Every room shared, every silence explained, every thought eventually spoken out loud, because keeping anything to yourself felt like a small betrayal. Psychologists have a name for what happens when two people merge like that, with no space left over. They call it losing differentiation. And it doesn't announce itself as a crisis. It shows up small, snapping over a mug, going quiet at dinner for no reason either person can name, resentment with no visible cause. The couple isn't running out of love. They're running out of self. David didn't understand any of this until the first morning. He woke up alone in the guest room and felt something that confused him. Not loneliness, relief. His shoulders actually dropped, and that reaction scared him more than any argument ever had. What did it mean that solitude felt easier than the marriage he loved? It took him months to arrive at the real answer. It wasn't easier than her. It was easier than the version of himself he'd been performing for her. The one with no edges left, no room to just be tired without narrating why. What he learned, slowly, was this: the less of himself he gave away trying to disappear into the more of himself he actually had left to bring back to her. Thanksgiving, 3 years ago. David's aunt leans across the table, voice dropped just low enough to seem private, loud enough for the whole room to hear. So, you two are doing okay? Everything all right at home? David smiles, says everything's fine, changes the subject, but he replays that sentence for days, not because it was cruel, but because of what was underneath it. A generation raised to believe one bed meant one marriage had just quietly filed him under problem to be solved. Here's the part that stung more than he admitted to anyone. 15 years earlier, he'd have asked the exact same question, in the exact same tone. He remembers a co-worker mentioning separate bedrooms once, and David remembers what he thought. Privately, without a second of doubt, that's sad. That marriage is probably over. Now he was the co-worker, and the judgment he used to hand out so easily, he was now receiving, with none of the context, none of the peace, none of the mornings that had gotten easier. That's the part almost nobody prepares you for. It's not the separate rooms that are hard. It's the friend who goes quiet when it comes up. The sibling who asks, "Are you sure?" in a tone that's already decided the answer is no. The 2 a.m. moment of wondering if you're the broken one, simply for admitting what actually lets you rest. David noticed his own guilt showing up in strange places, making the guest bed a little too neatly, like tidiness could prove it wasn't what people feared. Mentioning to almost no one, the way you'd mention something shameful, not something that saved a marriage. It took him a long time to flip the question. Why did he owe anyone an explanation for a decision that made him calmer, kinder, more present? The judgment was never about his marriage. It was about how uncomfortable people feel watching someone rewrite a rule they never had the courage to question themselves. Here's the question David gets asked most, once people finally stop judging long enough to actually ask. How do you know if this is healthy or if it's the beginning of the end? He didn't have a good answer for years. Then a therapist friend gave him 3 questions that changed how he thought about it entirely. First, was it a decision or a disappearance? Did both of you actually talk about it, even briefly? Or did one person just quietly stop coming to bed and the other was left to guess why? David remembers that his own shift started as an unspoken drift before it became a choice, and he admits that first year it wasn't fully healthy. It became healthy the day they finally talked about it out loud. Second, what happens in the daylight? Separate rooms at night, paired with warmth in the morning. Coffee together, easy conversation. A hand on the shoulder passing in the kitchen. That's 2 people who like their space. Separate rooms at night, paired with silence all day too. That's not about sleep anymore. That's distance wearing a sleep schedule as a disguise. Third, and David says this is the one that matters most. Has anything else gone quiet along with the bed? Touch. Curiosity about each other's day. The small, easy affection that has nothing to do with sex and everything to do with warmth. If that's fading too, the separate rooms aren't the cause. They're just the most visible symptom of something bigger going unaddressed. David likes to put simply now, when people finally ask him directly, we didn't stop being close. We just stopped confusing closeness with never being apart. David has a new ritual now. Every morning, before the coffee, before the day starts pulling at him in 6 directions, he walks from the guest room down the hallway to hers. Same hallway he used to stand in at 2 a.m., doubting himself. Now he walks it on purpose, in daylight, just to open her door and say good morning. It's a 15-second walk. It has taken him 55 years to understand what it actually means. Because anyone can lie next to someone out of habit, out of history, out of simply never questioning it. It takes something else entirely to walk towards someone on purpose every single day, when nothing is forcing you to. For most of his life, David measured love the way he was taught to, by proximity, by how many hours, how many nights, how little space ever existed between 2 people. Less distance meant more love. That was the whole equation. Now he measures it differently, not by how often 2 people are together without a choice in the matter, but by how often they still choose each other. On the mornings when they finally have one. That's the quiet inheritance David hopes this generation gets to leave behind. Not a marriage that never had an empty side of the bed, but one that finally understood the empty side was never the enemy. It was just someone finally resting enough to come back better in the morning. If any part of this felt like your own house, your own 2 a.m. hallway, your own version of a rule you inherited and never questioned, we genuinely want to hear it. Tell us in the comments. Is it the sleep, or is it something else in your marriage that's been quietly rewriting itself that nobody said out loud yet? And if this made you look at your own story a little differently, That's exactly why David Observed exists, one honest conversation at a time, about the parts of getting older that nobody prepared us for. Subscribe, and let's keep having them.